Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Kevin, great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, likewise. And also appreciate you having me on the marketing podcast, association podcast, I should say, earlier this week. And we had a really great conversation. And one thing that stuck with me is how you describe yourself as a marketing mad scientist, which I think is so memorable. So what does that mean to you? And how did you come up with that title?
It's really, scientists are constantly running experiments, right? And so part of it is just that constant desire to experiment and to invent. And sort of the other element of it is ever since, I was at McCann Erickson in 1992, right? I was always the geekiest person in the room, right? So I always loved this intersection between technology and marketing and advertising. And so that is another big sort of sciencey element of it, is I love trying to figure out how to glue multiple technologies together, or in some cases, if it doesn't exist, build it, right? So Didit's initial entry into the marketing services business was an SEO SaaS platform and a PPC platform, right? We only sort of evolved more into an agency model over time. But that marketing mad scientist piece is a constant thread that ties everything together.
Yeah, it makes sense. And can you dig into that a little bit more? So Didit, if my info is right, was founded in 1996, and congrats on being a business this long. How did the technology come about, and what made you decide to spin it off into an agency?
Yeah, I mean, the original technology was pretty simple. It's pre-Google, right? So pre-Google SEO tool called the Didit Detective, which would go out and see what your position was for your particular domain and your content in Lycos, in AltaVista, in InfoSeek. Many of these don't exist anymore, right? So the first generation of search engines. And it would then email you a report as part of the Didit Detective. And that was the freemium part of it. And then if you wanted it to automatically resubmit you and start optimizing your visibility within those search engines, then you could pay for it. You could upgrade to the paid version of Didit's and the Didit Detective. And so that was a SaaS business, pure SaaS. They didn't call it SaaS at the time. They called it an application service provider, right?
How sketchy.
The word SaaS hadn't, I think, been invented yet. And then we built the first, or one of the first, if not the first, bid alert system for GoTo.com, which is the first pay-per-click search engine, also pre-Google. And they originally had aspirations to become their own search engine. They were going to be their own portal. And it was only sort of a year later that they realized, like, oh, wow, we built the platform to manage the search ads, but it's really hard to get people to switch search engines. Maybe we should just power everybody else. Right. I think the first big deal they did was powering Yahoo. The search was the paid ads in Yahoo. It may have been AltaVista right around the same time. So they ended up becoming sort of the engine that powered the ad portions of the other engines. And then when Google was founded, obviously Google chose to build their own. So Didit's evolution, around bid management started it with just an email alert system for bids in GoTo.com.
Yeah, and then from there, like how did it become an agency, and what made you decide to go that direction?
To some extent, we didn't have a whole lot of choice. So there was a robust group of bid management companies in the first wave of PPC advertising for search. It was ourselves, Efficient Frontier, a company called Go Toast, which had gotten acquired, and Search Ignite. And then Marin Software was founded. And Marin decided to go big. So they raised over 100, I believe it was 101 million in venture money, and decided to aggressively pursue the market with pricing, low pricing. And they ended up going public, I believe, at about a $420 million valuation. And to my knowledge, they've never had a profitable quarter. So you can imagine being in the SaaS business and having to get questions during biz dev pitches where they wanted us to match Marin's price was a very challenging position to be in. So we layered services on top of our own technology as a way to bring EBITDA back into the equation. And, Efficient Frontier ended up getting acquired by Adobe, and, GoToast had gotten acquired, and, pretty much all the players except for Kenshu, which then renamed itself more recently, I think, Ska. They built a social media advertising management engine, which they were able to actually charge a reasonable fee for. They also still have a PPC bid management platform. But we got out of the bid management business because We layered in services. Then clients said, "Oh, this is really great. You're good at the service business. Can you also do this and this and this?" And so as we were integrating our Maestro technology into managing display on an automated basis and managing social on an automated basis, people kept asking us to do the hand holding and the strategy as well. So every time we added that layer on, it was good from the perspective of being able to, earn EBITDA, earn profit on that. But that category, the SaaS based bid management and campaign management platforms, just ended up not having the margin that we needed. So we ended up sunsetting Maestro and just, centralizing it, being technology agnostic. So we'll use any technology. We tend to generally use the Google stack, but our teams have been trained in most of the platforms at this point.
Yeah, makes sense. So sort of, back then in the 90s or whenever that exactly was, there's this pressure that I think a lot of us, a lot of agencies still feel to provide services, even if, and we've heard this even more recently from technology providers or people that have built software rather that have actually found that it's more about, or have sort of like drifted into a technology empowered service model. I think that's becoming, even more common in some ways. But to go back then, so you're kind of in the early days of adding services onto this technology. What was the next step? And like, how do you kind of look back and think about the stages of growth at Didit, over 25 some years now? Like, how do you kind of look back at those different level off points, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, when we were a SaaS platform and layered services on top, we maxed out at, I think, well over 130 people, right? And then, when we had to pivot and become really much more agency centric, we, ended up with less people, but we added services on at the same time. So we made 11 small acquisitions, including 3 PR agencies, a couple of direct mail companies, a creative shop, to sort of become full service. Because where I saw the business going was that as more and more advertising media became auction based, that you needed all of your cylinders firing in order to be able to afford that media. So your creative needed to be awesome, your targeting needed to be awesome, your landing page needed to be awesome, and your ability to then squeeze all the juice out of those registrations or initial purchases and get high lifetime value had to be all tuned. And if you failed anywhere along that, you couldn't afford the media, because the media was auctioned, right? And so you were essentially priced out of the media you needed to get scale, unless you were firing at all cylinders in the sort of compound marketing methodology, like compound interest, but it was compound marketing, because if you didn't have everything humming together, you were getting priced out. So we said, all right, well, the only way to solve that is to actually be able to do that. Because initially we would be like, oh, let somebody else do the web development. And then they would do a horrible job. And we're like, oh, no, that's not going to help us. We still won't be able to afford the media that the client needs, because they did a Flash-based website, and it's completely bad SEO and all these other problems, right? And so eventually we said, all right, fine, we're going to have to go into that business too, right? And as SEO got more technical, you needed to be able to go in and talk IT to IT with the coders and say, by the way, this JavaScript should really be minimized. And by the way, all your images are too big, right? And so the more we went down that pathway, the more we realized that you sort of need to be a one-stop shop in order to get everything humming, unless you have a really, really good sort of GC at the client side who can herd the cats, right? And say, oh, well, I have a really great email marketing agency and a really good social media agency and a really good influencer marketing agency and a really good SEO agency and a really good paid search agency and a really good YouTube agency. Like, very few clients can figure out how to pick the best within each one of those categories. And we've got our categories where we're completely unbeatable. And then we've got our categories where we're very good. And I don't want to have a B team, right, in any of my categories. And I'll admit that I've got like A+ teams in some of my categories, and those become sort of our Trojan horses. Because we can go in and we can blow away any agency. We can go in and do an audit. We can go in and actually do the work and move the needle dramatically. And conversely, we understand it's the agency business, so occasionally you lose business, right? And when you lose business, it's usually because somebody new shows up and they want to bring their posse along, and it works in both directions, right? And we've seen us lose a piece of business, and then we continue to watch their metrics in all the competitive intelligence tools, and it's sort of a bittersweet thing to watch a client tank when they change agencies, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, we really sort of liked those people. It's a shame they went with another agency and they're down over 20%, right? So it's good for morale from the perspective of this sort of weird schadenfreude that you get when you watch the client tank. And we get boomerangs all the time as a result, right? Because some decision makers are willing to say, listen, you made a mistake. Like, we went with the sizzle. We went with the sexy.
Yeah.
And it's not sexy. We're just good.
Yeah, that's a great thing to be, and that makes sense. And I guess so. I'm curious about that decision back then, right? To become the one-stop shop, because it sounds really hard, right? And I think a lot of people go different directions. There's becoming the one-stop shop. There's finding partners that can do other things. They're saying we don't even want to be an agency. We just want to get better at this one widget or solving this one little part of the problem and get really good at that. So how do you feel about that now? It sounds like it was the right decision from, as far as I can tell for you, but like, do you think there was another path you could have taken, and how hard was it to become that one-stop shop?
It was tough because we had to make a bunch of acquisitions. Sometimes we had to make 2 or 3 in the same category to get the quality of the people that we wanted, right? Because we were not just buying the revenue, but we were buying the people, because we had a certain bar that we wanted to be able to. It's to some extent, that decision has, I would say, potentially impeded our growth, right? But I would say it has more to do, or equally to do, with the fact that we've got 4 open headcount right now that we've had open. Most of them have been open well over 6 months, unhired, right? Because we'll bring in myself or my VP of HR. I'll bring in a person, and we'll be super excited to present them to the team, and the team will be like, nope, not up to our standards. I'm like, yeah, but they're there to help you, like, so that you don't have to work so hard and don't have to still be working at 7:30 p.m. They're like, no, it's not going to work out. Like, just keep looking.
Yeah.
Right. So part of that decision made it more difficult, because now I'm not just raising the bar within one subject matter category. I'm raising the bar across several subject matter categories, and it is difficult, right, to keep all the pieces humming at that level. And to some extent, I would say perhaps that has impeded growth. But there are certain things we chose not to acquire, certain directions where they were point solutions, like email marketing. Like, we do a pretty good job with email marketing, but there are definitely people that are better than us at email marketing. And we'll make a decision whether to make an introduction in that instance, for example, or a lot of pure performance on the affiliate side, like affiliate type deals. So we could hold our own compared to a bad affiliate agency, but there are affiliate agencies better than us, right? So if the client has a big element of their business that is affiliate driven, then we'll probably make a referral, right? And try to work in a triangular relationship as opposed to acquire. But if the right agency came along, right, at the right price, and we thought it made sense to acquire, we might pick up an email marketing agency, especially if they bridged into the CRM side of email. Because we sort of feel like that part of marketing, which is post-customer acquisition, is equally important. And so we haven't made any acquisitions there. And we're pretty good at CRM, right? And we're pretty good at email. And I would say we can still hold our own or beat most of the other agencies out there. But if I felt like I could ratchet that up with an acquisition, yeah, I think we would certainly consider it, right? Because it ends up important that those people can be in the same meetings, right? And that can be done across agency. That can be coordinated, but then you need the client heavily involved in that coordination at a strategic level.
Sure, that makes sense. And let's do a little sidebar on the acquisition side, because I'm sure there's lots of agencies listening that are either thinking about an acquisition or maybe hoping to get acquired themselves someday. And what went into that for you, and what do you tend to look for, in the companies you're acquiring? And also on the negative side, what are the things that have blown up acquisitions? Are there consistent red flags that you see from doing this for a while?
Yeah. I mean, the first acquisition we did was a company called Inceptor, which is located up in Boston. And I still have a team up there as a result of that acquisition maybe 11 years ago. And that was a really odd acquisition because it was secondhand, right? So the Inceptor had originally been sold to what at the time I think was Verizon Information Services, which ended up becoming Super Pages and Super Media. And then later on, Super Media decided they didn't want Inceptor anymore. And so it sort of came up for sale. And the first bid and the first signed LOI was a different agency. It wasn't us. We came in at what we thought was a reasonable price, and we were told to, suck wind. And then apparently the other deal fell through, and they came back to us and they said, "Are you still interested?" And then we went through the remainder of the due diligence and ended up making that acquisition. That was a great acquisition from every perspective. The team was awesome, and that there were some great existing clients there, including Foot Locker, which we ended up holding on to for another 7 years until there was a change in management at the digital side there. So that was our first foray, and it went so well. We got overconfident. We're like, "Oh, this M&A thing, this isn't so hard. Like, wow, that went really well. We should do more of this." And so we started to look at some other potential opportunities. And we ended up doing a total of 11, so 10 more. Two of them went south, right? One of them went really far south. So the one that went south, but not completely, where we were able to rescue it, was really a cultural fit issue at the management level. We hadn't really thought enough about what the roles of senior management would be post acquisition, right? And so, other than that, it sort of made sense. The jigsaw puzzles looked like they fit together, right? So it sort of made sense from a pure strategy perspective, and from a service offering perspective, and from a, for the most part, quality of team perspective. But then there ended up just sort of being some cultural clashes that happened in two of the sort of okay acquisitions. The only acquisition that went really far south was a situation where there were fraudulent books. And we thought, well, nobody would sign an asset purchase agreement that attested to the books being accurate and having them not be accurate. Like, no one would do that. Well, apparently some people will. And so that one had to get litigated. And, that was really a situation where, in hindsight, yeah, I mean, hindsight's always 2020, right? So the thing is, in the future, we would do a much deeper dive, looking not just at financial statements, but like the last month's bank statement, right, as well, right? Because wait that extra week for that month to close so that you can see if there was anything material that changed and stuff like that, where you take a person at their word. And especially if they're attesting to it in a legal document, you're sort of like, okay, well, they said it and then they signed it was true. Well, some folks, you don't understand their motivation. It may be one of those situations where something changed all of a sudden and they were like, "Oh, I can't really bring this up. It's going to clear the deal and I need the deal, blah, blah, blah." Several of the agency acquisitions that we made were situations where previous owners had taken out letters of credit from the bank that they were personally guaranteed on. And so then they were just paying the interest on these drawn down lines credit, and they couldn't seem to get out from under. Like, they could handle it, they could handle the interest, but like, in order for them to pay the principal down, they would have had to take a big hit to their own personal compensation. Of course, sometimes you have to do that, right? But they had gotten used to their particular level of lifestyle, right? And they were like, "Oh, I don't want to do that." And so those were sort of situations where we came in and had to figure out how to restructure things financially to get that debt taken care of. Sometimes you get synergies, with regards to overlap in staff, which is always unfortunate, but sometimes you can get rid of a finance person or get rid of an HR person when you absorb an agency, right? And so that manifests itself as savings, and then that can go towards paying down that debt, right? So if we were, for example, to assume the debt, right, we can then, use that cash flow that comes from the synergies of the two companies to sort of take care of that problem, which they couldn't figure out how to take care of under prior management. So I would say probably 40% of the deals that we've done had some element of that, where they were just sort of stuck on the flywheel and they couldn't figure out how to get off.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and that makes sense. And so you can hindsight's 2020. You can always do more due diligence, but at some point, it kind of makes sense that things have to get done. You have to trust people, especially if you're going to be working with them. Totally see that, and kind of tied to that is, it seems like there's kind of like a few big attractive things about the companies you might be looking at. It might be a technology they've developed, it might be their client roster, or it's the people that they have. Have you found that there's usually consistently one of those, or what are the things, like, out of those few big ones? Does it change, or is it usually that you're looking at the people more than anything else?
And then the people are usually pretty critical, right? Because when you're in the agency business, in the end, right, it's the people that make it special. But the people aren't the reason that the valuation is the net present value of future cash flows, or some amalgam of that, right? So you end up having to use the financial metrics and then assign levels of risk to every client relationship that's on the books, depending on how the contracts look and predicting forward cash flows for that client. And obviously, anytime there's a change in control, that's an extremely risky time for any client relationship. So it's sort of then balancing off the key people against the key accounts and calculating risk. And part of that also relates to concentration risk. So it's not unusual for agencies to have like an 80-20 rule or 90-10 rule. Usually not as bad as a 90-10 rule, but it might be a 70-30 or 80-20 rule, right? Where there's just a few whale clients are disproportionately, the business is disproportionately reliant on that, right? And so the first acquisition we did, Foot Locker, was that disproportionately large client. And there was a great team over there managing the relationship. And it ended up, the relationship was able to transition, and we were able to actually improve our level of service to the client. And that was a huge win, right? But when you see a lot of concentration risk for those folks who are thinking of selling as an agency, right? There's a headwind and tailwind element to the big clients you've got. They're attractive because they generate a lot of revenue and they may have a slightly higher EBITDA profit margin because of their size, but at the same time, it's revenue concentration risk. And so, you have to decide as an agency owner, what do you want your mix to look like? 3 whales and 20 tuna and a few carp, 200 carp, 16 tuna and 1 whale, right? No whales, like you have to decide, right? Because it's going to guide your biz dev strategy. When the time comes to sell or to start to shop yourself around, what that line by line revenue per customer chart or spreadsheet looks like ends up becoming pretty critically important.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you've been in that situation, either for yourself or companies you've recently acquired, and you do have that concentration problem, to sort of fix it and to go from more whales to more carp, or I've also heard it as deer or squirrels or every animal of the kingdom.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It seems like changing that distribution is kind of like a lag indicator, like it's an output metric. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what are sort of the input metrics that you've employed to diversify that more, and how have you thought about that in terms of your BD strategy?
I mean, certainly for our BD strategy, we have this conversation quarterly to sort of decide, do we want to shift a little bit more one way or the other? Because whales tend to have a longer sales cycle. They tend to be more complex sales. We need to be really confident of the fact that we've got the team and the bandwidth in place to handle the whale. As somebody put it to me, the dog who actually catches the car, like, now what do you do? Right? You may run after the car, catch the car as a dog and be like, wait a minute, I wasn't planning on catching I didn't think I was actually going to catch the car, right? So you have to be really careful in your biz dev process to make sure that you can actually digest the business and have, plans in place maybe for hiring or strategic partnerships or freelancers or whatever it is. Have that entire thing mapped out as you do the whale hunting side of your biz dev. And then, change your mix, right? To reflect where you'd like to be in 6 months or a year. And we're getting better at that all the time, right? Because we live and learn as we go there. Because when you get referral business, right? That wasn't strategic. That was sort of like somebody thought you would be a great fit. You get the referral business, easier to close, but you weren't going after that client strategically. So then you have to think through, okay, then how does that change my business mix for next month, right? So when we close a medium-sized client that actually has significant HR requirements with specific subject matter experts, for example, like maybe it's heavy on SEO, right? I then have to think about, okay, do we want to actually change our strategy on the go forward biz dev to not be so heavy on SEO till we can bring on another person on staff, right, for SEO? Because I always like to be a little bit ahead, but not too far ahead of where I need to be from a staffing perspective. Because I hate when the staff is overstressed. And obviously, it makes for the possibility of bonuses that would not otherwise be there, right? Because you didn't end up having the person who you needed, and so they worked extra hard. So come the end of the year, that gets reflected in bonuses. But still, I like to have everybody busy but not stressed, right? And so that finding that balance relates to your biz dev strategy. So that's sort of how we think it through. As we think through, as we close a piece of business, how does that change or go forward biz dev strategy? Does it change it from the size of client perspective? Does it change it from service mix perspective, right? Because I might have extra bandwidth in the, we just last week, we had a new person start in paid social, right? So now I actually have a little bit more bandwidth there. I might actually choose to more more aggressively pursue paid and organic social, which go hand in glove, right? So I might say, all right, well, this would be a perfect time because that person's not at 100% capacity, and that means I can go after that kind of business. So having a whiteboard or digital whiteboard and being able to talk it through with your department heads and executive team is really key. At least it has been for us.
Yeah, that's great. And because, we're a prospecting and sales focused business, and a lot of our clients are always thinking about growth and the new business front. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what does the sales team look like at Didit? Are you still involved in sales functions? If you've gotten out of it, how has that process gone? That's always good to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're pretty lean on the dedicated sales person. We just have one full-time salesperson. We've got two people in sort of marketing roles that support me and that person in our biz dev functions. But biz dev is a big piece of where I'm involved. And I think at the size agency that we're at, the prospects and the clients, they're buying a little piece of my brain, a little piece of the CEO's brain, a little piece of my VP of client services brain, even if they don't get us 100% on their account, right? From a strategic perspective, right? That's why it's important for me to be involved in the biz dev process. Now, we probably will add a more junior person just to sort of help appointment set for me, right? And that may sort of accelerate things next year, but I'm not going to really hit the gas until I have a couple of headcount positions filled for that. Just because, again, I want to make sure we're ready.
Yeah, that makes sense. And kind of tied to that is, it seems like your superpower is inventing technology and, being the mad scientist and all that stuff. So how much have you been able to sort of stay in that role without letting things like client relations or managing the team impede on that? And what steps have you sort of taken to stay there? If and I'm sure it's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, when you're a marketing mad scientist, you can't stop the idea from flying into your head. And sometimes it just needs to percolate there for a couple of months as you sort of think it through and decide, is this actually something I want to put developer hours against? Right. And then when you finally sort of can't help yourself, you're like, oh no, this is something legit. I have to build it. The most recent time that happened was a couple of years ago when I was really trying to think about how to differentiate direct mail in the high customer value segments, right? So which would be B2B and high-end B2C, where there would typically be sales teams. And so with digital variable printing, I said, well, why don't we build a QR code system that puts a unique QR code on every piece of mail, lets the person know it's a personalized offer if they scan the QR code. And if we let them know when we're fully transparent with our clients that this is a personalized offer and that QR code gets scanned, not only can we greet the person by name on the landing page and not creep them out, but we also can turn them into a Glengarry lead for the CRM, right? And let the sales teams know, like, okay, this person landed on your landing page. They thought enough of the offer to scan the QR code. So when you have nothing to do, why don't you call these people, right? So I just became convinced as a result of seeing QR codes come back, that they came back as a result of the pandemic, right? Because you couldn't order food in a restaurant unless you knew how to use a QR code. So they had been dead, right? And then they came back. Yeah. And I was like, okay, they're back. I sort of feel like most people know how to use a QR code scanner now. And so it's reached that penetration level where I sort of feel like it should be on a direct mail piece and it should be unique. And so I had the team build the system, right? And the sales team, my sales guy loved it. He's like, oh, this is like, I'm so sick of just fighting on price. When it comes to, when we get to a direct mail conversation, it's all about price. Now I have something to talk about that is not price. It's higher response levels, right? And the ability to generate Glengarry leads. So I had to sort of make that conscious decision. Sometimes the stuff percolates for a while, right? And sometimes it doesn't get built. Or sometimes the MVP gets built and then I realize, oh, wow, that was much harder than I thought to deploy, like a hyperlocal SEO platform that I built. Like it works perfectly in my brain, doesn't really work perfectly deployed. It still needs work. And so it would require a significant publisher partner to work, right, in an industry category. And haven't found that for that particular category yet. So, the stuff sometimes just makes it the MVP and then it gets backburnered.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess that's why we have MVPs and pencils and erasers, right? So
yeah.
That all makes sense. And with that, I forgot who said this, but it's something like it's not the obstacles that get in the way of achieving what we want. It's a clear path to lesser goals. And it seems like with so much potential for technology, there's so much potential to go in a million different directions. But it seems like you guys have stayed really focused on being the one-stop shop and doing really well with that and expanding strategically through acquisitions. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, this is kind of a big question, but how have you kept your ideas kind of like rowing with the rest of where the agency is heading, and how have you sort of avoided too many distractions?
Yeah, I mean, some distractions are okay. When business is your hobby and not just your vocation, right? I sort of allow myself, I started a nonprofit in a category that I have a passion for, and it didn't belong under Didit, right? It should really be a nonprofit focused in the cause marketing category because I had had a previous successful adventure in that direction. And so I was able to sort of, agency people are always compartmentalizing, right? Because you have to figure out how to manage relationships with a lot of different clients. And so every client's already in their own little compartment. And so I said to myself, well, I can create an extra compartment for something else which is outside the agency, right? So I did that with We Care, which became the inspiration for Amazon Smile. And I also have done it with Giving Forward, which is sort of the next generation of cause marketing technology platforms. But if you have great teams, then you can delegate nearly all of the doing, right? And then it's from a sort of slice of your brain for strategy and guidance. That gives you the freedom to then decide, okay, of my 80-hour week, I'm going to give 25 to a nonprofit, right? And to something that you're passionate about outside of your passion for the agency business and helping marketers. As to the e-marketing association, there was just sort of a tragic yet serendipitous story about how I acquired that. And I wasn't planning to become the CEO of the marketing association. It just sort of happened. And I use it for podcasts. And thanks for being a guest on that podcast. But that also I find is a way to reset the brain, right? Because every time I prep for a podcast for the marketing association, it forces me to learn about that other person's business, right? And I would want to do that anyway, because a lot of times they're an ad tech provider or a publisher or whatever, maybe even a competing agency. And it's just sort of, it's great because it exercises the brain muscle, right? Where I'm like, okay, what don't I know about this person's business? And what would other people want to know about this person's business? And they're not puff pieces, right? Because we generally talk about challenges that the overall industry is facing and how they're being solved. And of course, what that person does comes along for the ride. And sometimes it's a brand. I mean, I just did a great podcast with a VP of marketing from Danone, which isn't just in the yogurt business, and then had another one, a VP PepsiCo, right? Again, these are folks that are probably too big for me to pitch as a client. We could take a piece of what they're doing, but it's unlikely that we're going to become the AOR for PepsiCo or for Danone, right? So I don't pitch them at all. It's really just, let's have a marketing conversation, right? And so that's a great way for me to exercise my brain and sort of create a win-win scenario at the same time. So that's really the compartmentalization is key, and as to your comment about obstacles, right? I sort of realized I was a stoic when I tried to buy the Gawker brand to turn it into Gawker for Good under this idea of cause marketing powered content. And I read Ryan Holiday's book Conspiracy, which was about the Gawker story previous to my involvement as a bidder. And I realized how philosophical he was. I went and I looked at his other books, and they're all about stoicism. And the title that appealed to me next to read was "The Obstacle Is the Way," which he wrote,
Sure.
which is really about the idea that obstacles are not just obstacles. Sometimes they're just a way for you to stop, take a deep breath, and look for your way to navigate around the obstacle. And that's been sort of the story of my life, really, when you think about it. Like, just get back up again when you get knocked down and take it as a learning experience.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's such a great note to end on. And with that, what's on tap for the next year at Didit? Like, what are you excited about in 2023?
Yeah, I'm super excited because we're going to use the QR code tracking system in January for ourselves, right? So we're actually going to do a big direct mailing out to Shopify store owners, Magento store owners with the hyperlocal QR code. And we're going to make it like the B2B version of Valpak, right? We're going to do the e-marketing association e-com power pack. And I'm going to let other marketers come along for the ride that also want to speak to Magento and Shopify store owners and senior marketers. Because I figure if I'm going to throw it in the mail anyway, I might as well let other people come along, right? Because it actually makes the package more valuable for everybody. Like I don't know, maybe it's not true for you, but when I get Valpak, I just like to see, is there anything good in here? Like, even though I know I'm going to see the blinds and I know I'm going to see everything else that I've seen forever, it's sort of fun. Like the serendipitous idea that there might be a really great deal in there is fun. So, when we do that marketing in late January, it's going to be really fun because we'll be eating our own dog food, right? From a tech perspective.
Yeah, and I agree. And this is pretty anecdotal, and it's there's still plenty of junk mail, but I do feel like the quality of direct mail has been going up over time because it's not easy to do well, and I think it's it's sort of like become mature enough where only the best are doing it for whatever reasons. So that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's that, and a few other technologies that I'm working on, and a few other initiatives I'm working on. Just the idea that every day you get to sort of decide, what fun stuff can I work on today? It's sort of like what musicians and actors say, like, I can't believe we get paid for this. This is so much fun.
Yeah, what a great place to be and a great attitude on it. So with that, Kevin, where can people go to follow what you're up to, get in touch, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn's always the easy way to reach me. Kevin at any one of my domains works. Kevin at Didit, Kevin at emarketingassociation.com, Kevin at givingforward.org if they need to reach me via email. But LinkedIn is sort of a super easy way for them to connect with me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, sir. And we'll get that all linked up.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dan.